Welcome to lesson number 35, Electronic Records and Computer Regulations. Overview of this lesson. What is Part 11? What are the regulatory requirements for computer systems and electronic records and signatures? Electronic records and signatures. The pharmaceutical industry, on the whole, has been very slow to adopt to many of the computerized systems in use in other industries. This is partially to do with its inherently conservative nature and partially to do with concern over how these systems should be controlled and comply with regulations. Electronic signatures. Supposing you were to share your electronic password with one of your colleagues, or you leave your password in an easily accessed location, or you leave a PC unlocked and unattended. This means that somebody else can do work using your identity and you will be held accountable for it. What concerns would you have? What concerns do you think the regulators would have? They would worry about traceability. Is the right person doing the right tasks? They would question if the person was authorized to do the task. They would wonder if the person involved is trained to do the task. And they would also wonder what other controls are the site bypassing. What does paper give you? Well, paper means that modifications or alterations are very easily detectable. CGMP regulations are very easily applied to it, and you cannot easily disown a handwritten signature. It's very easily accessible for inspection. The benefits, though, of an electronic system. Paper systems can be really cumbersome. We need vast amounts of storage space to contain them. The logistics and the cost of file storage and retrieval are immense. There is ease of retrieval of electronic systems if they are properly managed, and electronic records are available for the defined retention period, just the same as paper records, but the advantage to electronic records are they are much easier to delete after the retention period has lapsed. Additionally, organizations who move to electronic systems often benefit from standardization, productivity, and other inbuilt efficiencies. So the regulations that monitor computer systems for us in the pharmaceutical environment are from the FDA, your Part 11 Electronic Records and Signatures, and your Annex 11 from the EMA, the European Medicines Agency for Computerized Systems. There are not hugely significant differences between them. However, it may still be worth having a review of both. 21 CFR Part 11, so the link to it is here. In the late 1990s, computer systems were beginning to be more widespreadly used in the pharmaceutical industry, and the regulators had to implement some safe controls for their use, so they issued Part 11. There's wide variation in the interpretation at the time and the implementation approaches that were used on sites, because sites were fairly unsure about what systems and records were within the scope of Part 11 and how they should be best implemented. So the FDA issued a guidance document on this, and you can see it in the reference section of this lesson. For the subpart B, electronic records, it talks about controls for closed systems, for open systems, signature manifestations, and signature and record links. And electronic signatures, it talks about the general requirements, electronic signatures, components and controls for identification codes and for passwords. The definitions for CFR Part 11, and again they're fairly similar for Annex 11. An electronic record is defined as any combination of text, graphics, data, audio, pictorial, or other information that is represented in a digital form that is created, modified, maintained, archived, retrieved, or distributed by a computer system. An electronic signature is defined as a computer data compilation of any symbols or series of symbols that are executed, adopted, or authorized by an individual to be the legally binding equivalent of that individual's handwritten signature. So your electronic signature is the legally binding equivalent for your handwritten signature. The key requirements for Part 11: to limit system access to authorized individuals only, that user access procedures, controls around user ID, and passwords and control systems are validated. Persons who develop, maintain, or use electronic systems will have the appropriate education, training, and experience to perform their assigned tasks. That there be adherence to written policies that hold individuals accountable for actions initiated under their electronic signature. That there are appropriate controls over system documentation. That requirements related to electronic signatures, such as your full name, the date, the time, and the meaning, is linked to the electronic record, and the username and password controls, such as uniqueness and aging. So Uterlex Annex 11, the link for it is here. The Uterlex is the rules governing medicinal products in the European Union, Volume 4, Good Manufacturing Practice of Medicinal Products for Human and Veterinary Use, and Annex 11 is the component of that document that complies with computerized systems. Its first iteration was issued in 1992, and the most current revision was issued in 2011. So we're going to have a look at Annex 11 in a little bit more detail to show you what is contained in it. So Annex 11. It firstly in section 1 talks about risk management. So risk management should be applied throughout the life cycle of the computerized system, and it should take into account patient safety, data integrity and product quality. So it is allowing you use of the ICH quality risk assessment management tools. As part of a risk management system, decisions on the extent of your validation and your data integrity controls should be based on a justified and documented risk assessment of the computerized system. So again, you can use your risk assessment tools to decide how much validation you do and what integrity controls you need to have based on the system that you're working with. Personnel. There should be close cooperation between all relevant personnel, such as the process owner, the system owner, the qualified persons, and IT. All personnel should have an appropriate qualifications, appropriate level of access, and defined responsibilities to carry out their assigned duties. Suppliers and service providers. With computer systems, we often buy in different computer systems, packages, oftentimes the management of your computer systems or your IT system is contracted out to a third party. So this section applies to that situation. So when a third party is used, you must have a formal agreement in place, and that has to issue a clear statement of the responsibilities of that third party. What are they responsible for? What is the site responsible for? The competence and the reliability of a supplier are key factors when they're being selected to provide a service or a product. And the need for auditing them has to be again based on your risk assessment tools. So you may or may not need to do a supplier audit. Documentation supplied with commercial off-the-shelf products should be reviewed to check that all of the user requirements have been fulfilled. Quality systems and audit information relating to suppliers or developers of software and implemented systems should be made available to inspectors on request. Section 4 relates to validation. So the validation documentation and reports have to cover the life cycle of the system. Manufacturers have to be able to justify their standards, their protocols, what acceptance criteria they're using, any procedures and records that they have in place, and that's all based again on a risk assessment. So they're very pro a risk assessment approach. Validation documentation should include our change control records. So change control again is a key component of managing these types of systems, and reports on any deviations observed during the validation process as well. An up-to-date listing of all relevant systems and their GMP functionality or their inventory should be available. For critical systems, an up-to-date system description, and that would include your physical and your logical arrangements, any data flows and interfaces, and hardware, software, and security measures that you have. That should be available. User requirement specifications should be based again on your documented risk assessment and on any GMP impact that pertains to it. The regulated user ensures that the system has been developed in accordance with appropriate quality management system. For the validation of bespoke or customized computer systems, there should be a process in place that ensures the formal assessment and reporting of quality and performance measures for all the life cycle stages of the system. Evidence of appropriate test methods and test scenarios should be demonstrated. So why did you pick those particular tests? Particularly system, parameter limits, data limits, and any error handling should be considered. Automated testing tools and test environments should have documented assessments for their adequacy. If data is transferred to another data format or system, validation must include checks that data are not altered in value and or meaning during this migration process. So number 5 is around data. Computerized systems exchanging data electronically with other systems should include appropriate built-in checks for the correct and secure entry and processing of data in order to minimize the risks. Accuracy checks. For critical data entered manually, there should be an additional check on the accuracy of the data. This check may be done by a second operator or by validated electronic means. So a good example of that might be when you're weighing out your raw materials into an API batch. You have to do a second check, so another operator needs to come and check the balance scales, or if you're able to automate that process so that the scales is a verified validated reading, that can be your second check. The criticality and the potential consequences of erroneous or incorrectly entered data to a system should be covered by risk management. Data storage. Data should be secured by both physical and electronic means against damage. So stored data should be checked for accessibility, readability, and accuracy. Access to data should be ensured throughout the retention period. Regular backups of all relevant data should be done. The integrity and the accuracy of backup data and the ability to restore the data should be checked during validation and should be monitored periodically. Printouts. It should be possible to obtain clear printed copies of electronically stored data. For records supporting batch release, it should be possible to generate printouts indicating if any of the data has been changed since the original entry. So again, they're looking here for an audit trail. Audit trail. consideration should be given based on risk assessment to building into the system the creation of a record of all GMP relevant changes and deletions. So they wanted to see if times have been updated, weights were updated, calculations were updated, if deviations were added, anything like that. For change or deletion of GMP relevant data, the reason should be documented. Audit trails need to be available and convertible to a generally intelligible form and regularly reviewed. 10 is around changes and configuration management. So again, most of this would come under our change control system unless you have a specific alternative system for managing these changes. Any changes to a computerized system, including a system configuration, should only be made in a controlled manner in accordance with a defined procedure. 11 is about periodic evaluation. So computerized systems should be periodically evaluated to confirm that they remain in a valid state and that they are compliant with GMP. Such evaluations should include, where appropriate, the current range of the functionality, any deviation records that apply, any incidents, problems that occurred, an upgrade to the history and the performance reliability, the security of it, and the validation status report. So the regulators here are looking to see that you are managing your systems on an ongoing basis, that it's not a case of, well, it's validated, it's running, off it goes, that somebody is managing the system, keeping an eye to see if there's any trends, any issues occurring, and that there's a proactive approach to managing all of those type of things. Security. Physical and or logical controls should be in place to restrict access to computer systems to authorized persons. So suitable methods of preventing unauthorized entry to the system. You can use things like keys, passcards, personal codes with passwords. Biometrics is a new thing. Restricted access to computer equipment and data storage areas as well, at a very minimum, that you have a passkey that people can't access the actual area if you can't physically put on any electronic restrictions or barriers. The extent of the security controls depends on the criticality of the computer system. Creation, change and cancellation of access authorizations should be recorded. So again, you need to manage who gets authorization, when they get it, and you need to take people off if they are no longer have the authorization to do a particular task. Management systems for data and for documents should be designed to record the identity of operators entering, changing, confirming, or deleting data, and that should include a date and timestamp so it's obvious when it occurred. Incident management. All incidents, not only system failures and data errors, should be reported and assessed. The root cause of a critical incident should be identified and should form the basis of corrective and preventative actions. Electronic signatures may be signed electronically. Electronic signatures are expected to A. have the same impact as a handwritten signature within the boundaries of the company, B. be permanently linked to their respective records, and C. include the time and date that they were applied. So a signature always has to be time and dated. Batch release. When a computerized system is used for recording certification and batch release, the system should allow only qualified persons to certify the release of the batches, and it should clearly identify and record the person releasing or certifying those batches. This should be performed using an electronic signature. One significant difference between the US and the European regulation is the requirement of a qualified person. A qualified person is a specific person with who the responsibility of batch release lies with. No other person on the site, apart from someone who is a qualified person, is allowed to release a batch. The qualified person usually is somebody who has a pharmacy background or who has completed a qualified person's master's, and they would be the only people that would be allowed access to release batches on a site. Business continuity. For the availability of computerized systems supporting critical processes, provisions should be made to ensure continuity of support for these processes in the event of a system breakdown. The time required to bring the alternative arrangements into use should be based on risk and appropriate for the particular system and the business process it supports. These arrangements should be adequately documented and tested. Archiving. Data may be archived. This data should be checked for accessibility, readability and integrity. If relevant changes are to be made to the system, e.g. computer equipment or programs, then the ability to retrieve the data should be ensured and tested. So those are the requirements of Annex 11, and you will see there's quite a significant overlap between those and Part 11 in the CFRs. Here are some references and further reading for you to have a look at. You can see that I've referenced the Part 11 CFRs and the Annex 11 link there also. It is very worth having a read of those. We have covered most of Annex 11 in this lesson, but if you want to have a further look at it, it's worth doing. Over to you. What are the regulatory requirements for electronic records and computer systems? List some of the considerations you should make when planning a computer validation project. Thank you very much.